Friends, welcome back. Hope you had a great break. It is time to turn our attention to another femme fatale of the opera, Lulu, and we're going to kick it off with a trailer from the Met's 2015 production of Lulu. Here we go. Would you please welcome back the opening act of this Lulu-palooza? Put your imaginary lighters in the air for our own Dr. Kamala Schelling. Woo!
Hi, friends. I'm feeling so much imaginary lighter love. I love it. I also love, well, I'll start with the sort of like we started with the list of things we were optimistic about at the top of this conference. I'll start with a list of things I love. I love Lulu. I love this production by William Kentridge. And I really love the fact that that trailer begins with the sort of the Rorschach blot of what I see as a naked woman, but this Rorschach blot of what do you see in it? Because to me, the very essence of Lulu is that Lulu is whoever the person looking at her wants her to be. And this is both her great weakness and her great strength, and something that initially is portrayed as a great strength, a great dangerous strength, and ultimately will turn out to be the thing that causes her downfall. So let's go back to the beginning. As far as femme fatales go, it would be hard to get a fataler femme than Lulu. Her story begins in 1892 when the German playwright Frank Wedekind starts writing a story about this woman, which he titles Pandora's Box. And I think it's worth mentioning, given everything that we're going to talk about over the next 10 minutes, at the time in German slang, box referenced a particular portion of the female anatomy. Yes, a fataler femme. Thank you, Susan Blackwell. So on the one hand, we have this reference, of course, to classical antiquity, another thing that is going to keep coming up, and also a very modern, for the time, sort of Pandora's box reference. He writes this story about a young woman who, using her sheer female sexuality, her prowess, her ability to get men to do whatever she wants them to do, manages to rise her way through the tiers of society, only then to fall on hard times, come crashing down, end her life working as a sex worker in a windowless garret in London, where she is ultimately murdered by Jack the Ripper. So this rise and fall of this woman. I think it will shock none of you to hear that in the 1890s, this did not leave censors feeling very magnanimous toward the show. And in city after city after city, it was banned, even as theater companies tried to take it on the road. So over the next decade and a half, Wedekind would rework it and tear it apart. He ultimately took Pandora's Box, split it into two plays, a diptych that became Earth Spirit and Pandora's Box, although they're typically performed together and often just referred to either as Pandora's Box or as Lulu. And of the various changes he made while he was going through this long process of revision, he added an introduction with an animal tamer. And if you look in the PDF of our educator guide for Lulu, our incredible graphic designer actually found a poster. He was Wedekind was on tour with the Ibsen Theater Company, which was a German theater company, trying to get them to perform Lulu. And somebody said, people might get it better if you had an introduction. So he simply tore down a poster and sketched it from the Ibsen Theater Company and sketched out on the back of it this animal trainer introduction. And our graphic designer found that poster, which is now at the Library of Congress, and put an image of it in the Educator Guide. And in this introduction, the animal tamer it's like he's standing outside a circus tent and calling out introductions to all the incredible animals he has. And the prize of his collection is the snake, Lulu. He describes as sort of the original female form. So of course we immediately get in this moment, not only is Lulu presented as an animal, but a very specific animal, an animal that references the fall from the Garden of Eden, the fall from paradise. But the twist is that rather than Eve being tempted by the snake, rather than it being feminine weakness, feminine gullibility that causes the fall, now the woman is the snake. She is the one causing the fall of mankind. And yet, would that it were so simple. As we watch Lulu, and I'm going to warn you right now, it's a really complicated storyline. I have been obsessed with Lulu for close to a decade now. I still can't keep all the characters straight. So rather than really trying to track each and every person in it, I would say track Lulu and her relationships with the people around her. And it doesn't really matter whether we're looking specifically at the acrobat or the schoolboy or the prince. What's important is Lulu's varying relationships with the people around her. But as we watch it, what becomes clear is not just that Lulu is this dangerous temptress, but that she is that way because she lives in a world where she has discovered that her only currency, the only card she has to play, is her sexuality. It's a man's world, and that's the only way she can get a foot up in it. And moreover, she has a really complicated past. There's a character, sort of a sick old beggar, Shigol, who we're never quite clear what his relationship is with Lulu. He's kind of a fatherly figure. He probably has also been sleeping with her. Her husband, Dr. Shern, has clearly been sleeping with her since she was very young. So Lulu is also a character who has gone through tremendous abuse and holds tremendous trauma and has found this one way to try to keep herself rising in the world, keep her head above water. And there's a famous quote by the Viennese critic Karl Kraus, who said, "Lulu destroyed all because she was destroyed by all." Okay, again, you can imagine the Viennese censors clutching their metaphorical pearls as they read through this play. And it was really hard to bring it to public performance, but it did enjoy private performances. Especially in Viennese society. And in 1905, the young composer Alban Berg saw a production, actually at Karl Kraus, that very critic I just mentioned. He saw a production at his house of Pandora's Box, I believe with Frank Wedekind's wife, Tilly, playing the role of Lulu. And just on that, sort of on that track, a fun side fact is that Frank Wedekind himself played the role of Jack the Ripper, and when Erdgeist in Pandora's Box, Earth Spirit in Pandora's Box finally did premiere in public. And Berg was instantly really impressed. So this is again 1905. Berg was very impressed by what he saw on stage and thought it would make a great opera. But, one thing led to another. He got distracted writing his opera Wozzeck, didn't actually come back around to writing Lulu, the opera, until 1928. And he actually picked it up after another opera that he'd been hoping to write fell through because he couldn't get the rights to it. So in 1928, Berg writes to Wedekind's widow to get permission to write the play, to write the libretto, writes the libretto quite quickly, starts putting together a score, works on it for 7 years. But when he dies unexpectedly, poor Berg got an insect bite, which got infected and ultimately led to his death. So keep wearing your bugged out, friends. When he died unexpectedly, he had a short score finished, but the third act was not yet finalized. So when Lulu actually premiered in the 1930s, they only performed the first 2 acts. And it wasn't until the 70s that another person came in and finished up the third act, and all 3 acts of Lulu premiered. Now, Berg, as a composer, was very interested in the structural integrity of his compositions. For those of you who studied Wozzeck, you might remember that each of the 15 scenes is based on a historical musical form. In this case, in the case of Lulu, Berg wanted to create an arc form where the rise up is Lulu's rise through society, then something happens, and on the other side, she falls. At that center point, at the apex of the arc, Lulu ends up in prison. She's been accused of murder. And then she comes up with this clever scheme to get out of prison, but things don't really go well for her after that. Rather than actually staging that scene, he wrote an orchestral interlude that was supposed to depict that. And then his original conception was that there would be a silent film that would be projected at that moment, depicting these scenes from Lulu's life. The other great thing about Berg is that he was writing in a style of composition called 12-tone composition, which is really fun to study, but quite complicated initially. Our dear Tim Brendler, who I can actually see looking at me from the top of my Zoom screen, wrote a fantastic activity for the Google Classroom about 12-tone music. But one of the cool things about 12-tone music is that you can run music forward and backward. So there are actually little chunks of music that, because Berg wanted to create this arc structure, things that run forward in the first half, then run backwards in the second half to really create this cohesive, she rises and then falls. And the other thing Berg did to make clear how connected these two halves of the arc were, and again, the idea that the men that Lulu destroyed also destroy her, was he did a great amount of double casting. So this wasn't double casting because a theater couldn't afford to hire enough actors for their singers for the various roles. There were very specific connections drawn between the characters. So for instance, several of Lulu's husbands in the first couple of acts come back as her clients when she's a sex worker at the end. Dr. Schern, who is obviously the most prominent of Lulu's husbands / protectors in big scare quotes, at the beginning comes back as Jack the Ripper. So the one who's supposed to be sort of the central focus of her marital life comes back as the man who ultimately, very literally, destroys her. Lulu is a fantastic opera. It's not easy. There is pretty much every trigger warning for students. So I would recommend using, again, Stephanie Hendricks has created a phenomenal set of activities. I would recommend really using those to create a safe space for your students to talk about Lulu, but I think it's a really great opportunity to talk about issues of femininity and gender, consent, all sorts of great things if you feel like you can create a safe space for that in your classroom. And as just a couple of final, I have about 30 seconds left, is just a couple of final fun facts. First of all, check out the 1929 film Pandora's Box with Louise Brooks, a great example of early film based on the Lulu story. And then check out the album Lulu, which was Lou Reed's final studio album before his death. He did a collaboration with Metallica, of all people, based on the story of Lulu. So this is a character, a woman who has inspired artists across the different artistic disciplines. She is fascinating, she is terrifying, she is heartbreaking, and I can't wait for you to go get to know her. Thank you, friends.
Thank you, Dr.
Throwing it back to
Kamala
Susan
Schelling.
Blackwell.
Dr. Kamala Schelling, can I ask you a quick question? Is
Of
the
course.
preferred pronunciation Lulu, like both stressed equally? Because I think I've always said Lulu.
In American contexts or Anglophone contexts, I've always heard Lulu. In Germany, they call her Lulu. But I think it could go either way, whichever one strikes your fancy.
I'll just alternate every time I say it. I'm going to go back and forth and back and forth.
I think you should. Or, maybe add some extra Lus. Lulu.
That's right.
Also, I will say in reference to that, if we think about who gets to tell Lulu's story, if we bring in the notion of the male gaze and who's looking at her and who's defining her, and like I said at the beginning, she is whoever the man in her life wants her to be. As you watch it, you'll notice that the first few men all give her different names. She calls herself Lulu, but her early husbands, they name her Nellie, they name her Mignon, they name her Ava. So there's your connection to Eve. So even something as fundamental as her name gets changed depending on who she has to be in a given context. So it's totally appropriate, Susan, that we should have a discussion about what her name really is.
Oh, Dr. Kamala Schelling, thank you so much. Every time you open your mouth, I learn new things, and I appreciate you for
Oh, I
that.
love getting to do this. It's such a pleasure to be here with you.